Marcus Chen stared at the elegant wedding invitation on his mahogany desk, the gold embossing catching the afternoon light streaming through his corner office windows. Victoria Wellington and James Morrison cordially invited him to witness their union at the Ritz-Carlton in Napa Valley. His ex-fiancée was getting married, and she had the audacity to invite him. He loosened his Italian silk tie, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that Victoria's name still brought. 3 years since she'd called off their engagement, claiming he was emotionally unavailable and married to his work. The irony wasn't lost on him that she was now marrying James Morrison, heir to a hotel empire and exactly the kind of man her family had always preferred. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Sarah had worked for him long enough to read his moods like stock market fluctuations. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," she said, then noticed the invitation. "Bad news? My ex is getting married." Marcus set the card aside, attempting indifference. "She wants me to attend." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Will you go?" The question hung in the air. Going meant facing Victoria's family, who had never thought he was good enough despite his billion-dollar tech empire. It meant enduring pitying looks from mutual friends who would whisper about how he was still single at 32. It meant watching the woman he'd once loved promise herself to someone else. "I haven't decided," he lied. He'd already made up his mind the moment he saw James Morrison's name. He would go, and he would prove that he had moved on spectacularly. He just needed to figure out how. Elena Rodriguez checked her phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes, hoping for a callback from this morning's audition. The role of concerned wife number 3 in a pharmaceutical commercial wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than her current gig serving overpriced coffee to tech bros in Silicon Valley. Her 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland was a far cry from the Hollywood dreams she'd harbored 5 years ago when she'd left her family's bakery in San Antonio. Now 28, she was beginning to wonder if her mother had been right about choosing practical over passionate. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. The subject line made her blink twice. "High-paying acting opportunity, immediate response required." The message was brief and intriguing. A private client needed an actress for a weekend-long performance. The role required someone sophisticated, well-spoken, and comfortable in upscale social settings. No nudity, no illegal activities. $5,000 for 3 days of work. Elena's rent was due in a week, and her bank account was running on fumes. She'd learned to be cautious about too-good-to-be-true opportunities, but something about the professional tone and specific requirements felt legitimate. She responded immediately, attaching her headshots and resume. Within an hour, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and belonged to someone named Sarah, who explained that her client needed to interview potential candidates that afternoon. Could Elena be at a downtown office building by 4 o'clock? As Elena hung up and began selecting her most professional outfit, she couldn't shake the feeling that this opportunity might change everything. She just had no idea how dramatically. The elevator to the 42nd floor of the Chen Technologies building moved smoothly upward as Elena checked her reflection one last time in the polished steel doors. She'd chosen her best black dress, simple, elegant, and hopefully expensive-looking enough for whatever this job entailed. Sarah met her in the reception area, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of unflappable competence. She led Elena through a maze of glass-walled offices filled with people who looked like they'd never worried about rent in their lives. Marcus Chen's office was impressive in its understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay, while carefully selected art pieces and a wall of technology patents spoke to both wealth and achievement. The man himself stood with his back to the door, talking quietly on his phone in what sounded like Mandarin. When he turned around, Elena understood why his company's stock price had jumped every time he appeared on magazine covers. He was handsome in an effortless way that suggested good genes and better personal trainers, with dark hair that looked professionally tousled and eyes that seemed to catalogue everything at once. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, ending his call and extending a hand. His grip was firm, confident. "Thank you for coming on short notice. Please, sit." Elena settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her car. "I have to admit, your job posting was intriguingly vague." A smile ghosted across his lips. "I need someone to pretend to be my wife for a weekend." The words hung between them like a challenge. Elena had expected many things from this meeting, but not this level of directness. "That's either the beginning of a romantic comedy or a crime thriller," she said carefully. "I'm hoping for the former." Marcus appreciated her composure. Most people would have either fled or started asking inappropriate questions by now. Elena Rodriguez sat calmly, waiting for him to explain, her dark eyes alert but non-judgmental. "3 days ago, I received an invitation to my ex-fiancée's wedding," he began, choosing his words carefully. "We ended our engagement 3 years ago, and frankly, I thought she'd have better taste than to invite me. But Victoria has always enjoyed making statements." Elena nodded thoughtfully, and showing up with a wife would be quite a statement. "Exactly." Marcus moved to the windows, looking out at the city he'd helped reshape with his innovations. "Her family never thought I was good enough. Too focused on work, not the right social connections, wrong background. The irony is that I'm now worth considerably more than her new fiancé, but that's beside the point." "What exactly is the point?" Elena asked. He turned back to face her. "The point is proving that I've moved on, that I'm happy, successful, and completely unbothered by her choice to marry someone else. By hiring a fake wife. By hiring a talented actress to play my wife," Marcus corrected. 3 days, 2 nights at a luxury resort in Napa Valley. You'd need to be convincing, comfortable with physical affection for appearances, and able to handle high society small talk. In return, you'd receive $5,000 plus expenses, wardrobe, and probably the best food you've ever eaten. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus found himself studying her face. She had the kind of beauty that didn't need enhancement. Natural, warm, with expressive eyes that suggested intelligence and humor in equal measure. "What happens if someone recognizes me as an actress?" she asked. "Do you think they will?" Her laugh was rueful. "Probably not. My biggest role was in a yogurt commercial that aired exactly 3 times. Then we shouldn't have that problem. The question is whether you're interested." Elena's practical side warred with her instincts as she walked back to her car. $5,000 would solve her immediate financial problems and buy her time to find better auditions. The job seemed straightforward enough. Smile, make small talk, pretend to be madly in love with a gorgeous billionaire for a weekend. She'd had worse gigs, but something about Marcus Chen nagged at her. Despite his polished exterior and businesslike approach to what was essentially emotional manipulation, she'd caught glimpses of genuine hurt in his eyes when he mentioned his ex-fiancée. This wasn't just about proving a point, it was about protecting his pride after a very public rejection. That evening, she called her best friend Sophia for a sanity check. "Let me understand this," Sophia said over video chat from her apartment in Los Angeles, where she worked as a makeup artist. "A tech billionaire wants to pay you $5,000 to pretend to be his wife at his ex's wedding. That's the basics, yes. And you're hesitating because—" Elena paced her small living room, phone in hand. "Because it feels like I'd be taking advantage of someone who's clearly not over his ex. Also, what if I'm terrible at it? What if everyone sees right through us? Honey, you've been acting since high school. Remember when you convinced Mrs. Patterson that you had food poisoning instead of admitting you forgot to study for her chemistry test? That was different." "How?" Elena couldn't explain the feeling that accepting this job would change something fundamental about her life. Maybe it was just desperation making her overthink what should be a simple business transaction. "He seems lonely," she said finally. "So are you," Sophia pointed out gently. "When's the last time you went on a real date?" Elena couldn't remember, which was probably Sophia's point. She'd been so focused on surviving financially that she'd put her personal life on indefinite hold. That night, she composed and deleted a dozen emails before settling on a simple response. She would take the job. The next week passed in a blur of preparation that made Elena feel like Cinderella being readied for the ball. Marcus had arranged for a personal shopper to outfit her with everything from cocktail dresses to casual resort wear, all in sizes that fit her perfectly. Someone had clearly done their homework. They met 3 times to go over their cover story and practice being a convincing couple. During their first rehearsal dinner at an upscale restaurant, Marcus had been stiff and formal, treating her like a business associate rather than a romantic partner. "You're going to have to actually touch me if this is going to work," Elena had said over appetizers that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "Right now, you look like you're dining with your accountant." He'd loosened up gradually, learning to rest his hand on her back when they walked, to lean in close during conversation, to laugh at her jokes as if he found her genuinely delightful. By their 3rd practice session, the gestures were becoming natural enough that Elena sometimes forgot they were performing. The backstory they developed was simple. They'd met at a charity gala 8 months ago, had a whirlwind romance, and married in a small ceremony 6 weeks prior. They were still in the honeymoon phase, which would explain any nervousness or overcompensation in their interactions. "What's my favorite thing about you?" Marcus asked during their final preparation session, quizzing her as they walked through Golden Gate Park. "My laugh," Elena replied automatically. "You say it makes you feel like you're hearing music. And yours about me? The way you really listen when I talk. Like what I'm saying actually matters to you." They stopped walking, and for a moment, the practiced responses felt uncomfortably real. Marcus was looking at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with their rehearsed chemistry. "We should head back," Elena said, breaking the moment. "Big day tomorrow." The Ritz-Carlton in Napa Valley was exactly as stunning as Elena had imagined, with sweeping vineyards stretching toward rolling hills and architecture that whispered old-world elegance. As their car pulled up to the main entrance, she felt Marcus tense beside her. "Remember," he said quietly, "we're madly in love and completely happy." "Got it." Eleanor squeezed his hand, surprised by how cold his fingers were. "Are you nervous?" "I don't get nervous." "Everyone gets nervous, it's human." Marcus glanced at her, and she caught a glimpse of vulnerability beneath his composed exterior. "I haven't seen Victoria in 2 years. I don't know how I'll react." Before Elena could respond, a valet was opening her door, and they were swept into the luxurious chaos of wedding weekend check-in. The lobby buzzed with well-dressed guests, and Elena quickly identified Victoria's family by their air of inherited confidence and the way other guests gravitated toward them. "Marcus!" A woman's voice cut through the chatter, and Elena felt him stiffen. Victoria approached with the kind of grace that came from years of finishing school, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her smile radiant. She was beautiful in the way that money and breeding could create, polished, refined, and utterly intimidating. "Victoria." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "Congratulations." "Thank you for coming," Victoria said, then turned expectant eyes toward Elena. "And you must be—" "Elena Chen," Elena said, extending her hand and noting Victoria's slight flinch at the shared surname. "Marcus's wife." The word hung in the air like a small explosion. Victoria's smile faltered for just a microsecond before reforming, brighter and more brittle than before. "Wife?" Victoria's laugh was musical and sharp. Marcus, you didn't mention... When did this happen? Elena felt Marcus's arm slide around her waist, pulling her closer. 6 weeks ago, he said, his voice warming as he looked down at her. We couldn't wait. The next few hours were a masterclass in social maneuvering as Marcus and Elena made their way through the pre-wedding festivities. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the performance, laughing at Marcus's dry humor, letting him guide her through conversations with his hand on the small of her back, playing the role of the blissfully happy newlywed with increasing confidence. Victoria's family received the news of Marcus's marriage with varying degrees of surprise and what Elena could only describe as disappointment. It was clear they'd expected him to remain pining for Victoria indefinitely. She's lovely, Victoria's mother, Patricia Wellington, said to Marcus while Elena was getting drinks at the bar. The older woman's tone suggested she found this development personally offensive. Very exotic. Elena bristled at the casual racism, but kept her expression neutral as she returned with champagne. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she realized he was angry on her behalf. Elena is an actress, he said smoothly, his arm finding its way around her waist again, though she's taking a break from her career to focus on our new marriage. How romantic, Patricia replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. And where did you two meet? They launched into their rehearsed story about the charity gala, with Elena adding small details that made their relationship feel lived in and real. She mentioned how Marcus always ordered her favorite wine without asking, how he'd learned to make her grandmother's tamale recipe, how they'd spent their first Christmas morning in bed reading the newspaper and sharing coffee. By the time they excused themselves to dress for dinner, Elena was beginning to understand why Marcus had needed armor for this weekend. Victoria's family wasn't just wealthy, they were the kind of people who viewed love as a merger and treated outsiders like hostile takeover attempts. "You're handling this perfectly," Marcus said as they walked to their suite. "Better than I hoped." "They're awful to you," Elena replied, feeling genuinely protective of this man she barely knew. "Do they realize you could probably buy and sell most of them?" Marcus's smile was rueful. "Money isn't everything to people who've never had to worry about it. To them, I'll always be the scholarship kid who got lucky." The rehearsal dinner was held in the resort's vineyard pavilion, with string lights creating a canopy of stars above tables laden with flowers and crystal. Elena had never felt more out of place or more determined to play her role perfectly. She and Marcus were seated at a table with several of his former mutual friends with Victoria, and Elena quickly realized this was intentional positioning. They were on display, being evaluated and judged by people who had known Marcus during his relationship with Victoria. "You two seem so natural together," commented Jessica, a woman whose diamond tennis bracelet probably cost more than Elena's annual salary. "It's wonderful to see Marcus so relaxed." Elena glanced at her fake husband, who was indeed more relaxed than she'd seen him. The stiffness from their early practice sessions had disappeared, replaced by genuine warmth that made their interactions feel effortless. "He makes it easy," Elena replied, letting her hand find his on the table. "I've never been with someone who just fits." The words were part of their script, but as soon as she said them, Elena realized they felt uncomfortably true. Marcus's thumb brushed across her knuckles, and the small gesture sent warmth up her arm. During dinner, Victoria stopped by their table, radiant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Elena's car. "Marcus, I'm so happy you found someone," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet. "After our conversation 2 years ago, I was worried you might never put yourself out there again." Elena felt Marcus tense beside her. "What conversation?" she asked, the question coming out more sharply than she'd intended. Victoria's smile was sympathetic. "Oh, just Marcus, telling me he didn't think he was capable of the kind of love I deserved." that he was too damaged by his childhood to ever really open up to someone. The words hit the table like stones thrown into still water. Elena could feel Marcus's embarrassment radiating off him in waves. "People change," Elena said firmly, her protective instincts overriding her role as hired actress. The right person can help someone discover parts of themselves they never knew existed. Later that night, Elena found Marcus on their suite's balcony, staring out at the moonlit vineyards. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and something about his posture suggested defeat. "Want to talk about what Victoria said?" Elena asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Not particularly." Marcus's voice was flat. "Though I suppose you deserve to know what kind of person you're pretending to be married to." Elena waited, sensing he needed space to decide how much to share. "My parents divorced when I was 8, he said finally. "Messy, angry, lots of screaming and lawyers. My father moved across the country and started a new family. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat and barely had energy for conversation, let alone affection." He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Victoria wasn't wrong. I am damaged. I throw myself into work because it's predictable, controllable. Relationships require vulnerability I'm not sure I'm capable of." Elena studied his profile in the moonlight, this successful, powerful man who seemed so lost when stripped of his professional armor. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "I think Victoria was an idiot who couldn't recognize emotional intelligence when she saw it. Everything you've shared with me this week about your childhood, your fears, your hopes, that's vulnerability. That's openness." Marcus turned to look at her, and Elena saw something shift in his expression. "This is probably the longest real conversation I've had in months," he admitted. "Most people want to talk about stock prices or acquisition deals. You ask me what I actually think about things. Maybe that's because I'm not trying to get anything from you except what you're willing to give." The irony of her words wasn't lost on either of them. She was literally being paid to be there, but somehow that artificial beginning had created space for genuine connection. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Tomorrow, after the wedding." "Let's get through tomorrow first," she interrupted, sensing they were approaching dangerous territory. One performance at a time, Elena woke up in the massive hotel bed alone, finding Marcus already dressed and standing by the windows with his phone pressed to his ear. Even on a Saturday morning at a wedding weekend, business couldn't wait. The day passed in a blur of champagne toasts, flower arrangements, and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying conversations with other guests, many of whom were more interesting than she'd expected. A venture capitalist's wife turned out to be a former teacher with fascinating stories about educational reform. A pharmaceutical executive spent 20 minutes showing her photos of the animal shelter he volunteered at on weekends. As the afternoon wore on, Elena realized she was having fun, not just playing a role, but actually enjoying herself in a way she hadn't in years. Marcus seemed lighter too, laughing more readily and showing glimpses of charm that had nothing to do with their pretense. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way that unlimited budgets could create. Victoria looked stunning in a dress that belonged in a fairy tale, and James Morrison seemed genuinely smitten with his bride. Elena found herself feeling happy for them, despite everything. But she also found herself watching Marcus during the vows, noting how his jaw tightened when Victoria promised to love James with her whole heart, how his hand found hers and squeezed tightly when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. "You okay?" Elena whispered as the new couple kissed and the guests erupted in applause. "Perfect," Marcus replied, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Absolutely perfect." The reception was held in the resort's grand ballroom, transformed into something from a Hollywood movie with towering flower arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and a dance floor that gleamed like ice. Elena and Marcus found themselves at a table with other couples, and she realized they'd become the evening's entertainment. Everyone wanted to hear their love story, to understand how Marcus Chen had gone from confirmed bachelor to married man in such a short time. As the evening wore on, and the champagne flowed freely, Elena found herself relaxing into the role so completely that she almost forgot she was acting. Marcus was charming and attentive, his hand never leaving her back or her waist. His attention focused on her as if she were the most fascinating person in the room. When the band started playing and other couples began moving to the dance floor, Marcus extended his hand to her with a questioning look. "I should mention I'm not a great dancer," Elena said as he led her onto the floor. "Follow my lead," he replied, pulling her close. "We'll figure it out together." The song was something slow and romantic, and Elena found herself pressed against Marcus's chest, breathing in his cologne and feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His hand was warm against her back, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with their performance. Around them, other couples swayed to the music, lost in their own worlds. But Elena felt like she and Marcus were in a bubble, separate from everyone else, moving together as if they'd been dancing for years instead of minutes. "Elena," Marcus said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Don't," she whispered, knowing instinctively what he was about to say. "Not here. Not now." But even as she said it, she tilted her face up toward his, and when his lips brushed hers, soft and tentative, she didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and Elena found herself kissing him back before she could think better of it. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, the song had ended, and other couples were applauding. Elena realized they had been too, and she wondered how many people had witnessed their moment of very real intimacy. "We should," she started to say, but Marcus's phone was buzzing insistently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, I have to take this. Emergency with the Tokyo launch." As he stepped away to answer the call, Elena felt the spell of the evening break. She was reminded suddenly and sharply that this was all pretense, that Monday morning Marcus would go back to his billion-dollar company, and she would go back to serving overpriced coffee and auditioning for yogurt commercials. Elena woke up Sunday morning with a headache that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with the emotional whiplash of the previous evening. Marcus was already gone, his side of the bed unslept in, and she realized he must have worked through the night dealing with whatever crisis had pulled him away from the dance floor. She found him on the balcony, still in his wedding attire from the night before, laptop balanced on his knees and phone pressed to his ear. He looked exhausted and stressed, the relaxed man from the wedding reception replaced by the driven CEO she'd first met in his office. When he finally ended his call, Elena was dressed and packed, her borrowed fairy tale weekend folded neatly back into her small suitcase. "Crisis averted?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "For now." Marcus rubbed his eyes, and Elena noticed his hands were shaking slightly from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "I'm sorry about last night. The call, not being here when you woke up." "It's fine, I understand." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "About what happened on the dance floor." "That was my fault," Marcus said quickly. "I crossed a line. It won't happen again." His words stung more than Elena had expected. "Right. Of course, just part of the performance." Marcus looked at her sharply, and for a moment she thought he might contradict her. Instead, he nodded curtly. "Exactly." The drive back to San Francisco was quiet, filled with the kind of awkward tension that comes after saying too much or not enough. Elena stared out the window at the passing vineyards and tried to convince herself that she hadn't actually fallen for her fake husband over the course of one weekend. When they reached her apartment building, Marcus insisted on walking her to her door, carrying her suitcase like a gentleman even though their business arrangement was officially over. "The check will be in your account tomorrow morning," he said, standing awkwardly in her narrow hallway, "plus a bonus for handling everything so well." "Thank you." Elena fumbled with her keys, desperate to get inside before she said something she'd regret. "I hope Victoria was impressed." "She was." Marcus hesitated, then added, "Everyone was. You were perfect." The word perfect hung between them, loaded with everything they weren't saying. "Goodbye, Marcus," Elena said, opening her door. "Goodbye, Elena." Elena's phone buzzed with a text message as she walked home from her new job at a downtown theater company. The position as assistant director didn't pay as much as serving coffee, but it was actually in her field, and she'd been happy in a way that had nothing to do with her bank account. The message was from an unknown number, but she recognized Marcus's formal tone immediately. "Saw the review of your show in the Chronicle. Congratulations. You deserve every success." Elena stared at the message for a long moment, remembering. 6 months had passed since their weekend in Napa, and she'd thought about Marcus more often than she cared to admit. She'd seen his name in the business pages occasionally, read about his company's expansion into new markets, wondered if he ever thought about their fake marriage that had felt uncomfortably real. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "Thank you. I hope you're well." His reply came quickly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about finding the right person to help discover parts of yourself you never knew existed." Elena's heart skipped, but she forced herself to be realistic. "Oh, would you like to have dinner? As ourselves this time, no performance required." Elena smiled, remembering the man who had held her on the dance floor, who had shared his deepest fears on a moonlit balcony, who had looked at her like she was the only person in the room, even when surrounded by hundreds of wedding guests. "I'd like that," she typed back, "but fair warning, I'm terrible at first dates." "Good thing this feels more like a second chance." Udayam. As Elena walked the rest of the way home, she thought about stories and how they sometimes circle back on themselves in unexpected ways. She'd been hired to help Marcus prove he'd moved on from his past, but maybe what they'd both discovered was that moving forward sometimes meant being brave enough to let someone new into your present. The evening sun painted the San Francisco sky in shades of gold and pink, and Elena found herself looking forward to tomorrow in a way she hadn't in years. Some performances, she realized, had a way of becoming real when you weren't paying attention. Maybe the best love stories started with pretending and ended with the courage to stop. Thank you so much for listening to Marcus and Elena's story. We hope you enjoyed this journey of fake marriage, real feelings, and second chances. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from around the world, whether you're in New York or Tokyo, London or São Paulo. We're grateful to have you as part of our storytelling community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who believes in the magic of unexpected love. Until our next story, keep believing in happy endings.